welcome to the Transportation Committee meeting of October 28th, 2015. I'm Councilman Mike Bonin, the chair. I am joined by my colleague Mary Martinez, Mr. Weezar, Mr. Koretz, and Mr. Rue will be here shortly. I am going to start, as is the custom here, with our multimodal roll call. In the past 2 weeks, who has commuted by bus? By train? Bicycle? Who's walked to work? Oh, that's low for this meeting. Okay. Okay. Well, thanks for the show of hands. We're going to move quickly. This meeting has to end by 2:30 because I'm in another committee meeting at 2:30. So we're going to try to get through things quickly. I was going to suggest that items 1 through 4 be moved on consent. We have a number of speaker cards that have been submitted for items that would otherwise be consent. So Mr. Walsh and Mr. Spindler, I'm going to give each of you 5 minutes to start the meeting, and that'll be your public comment for all the cards you've submitted.
All right.
Mr. Spindler, you may begin.
Oh, okay. Yes, I know we're in a hurry. So, item 1, the establishment of oversized vehicle restricted street. Now, what that is people are buying these used campers and they're living on the streets in these mobile homes. This is the wave of the future. It's a good thing. So, people should be able to buy a camper and live on it in the street for free, because that's the way it should be. The streets belong to the people, does not belong to special interests. So, number 1 is a violation of the Constitution. It should be denied. Now you have an expedited fee trust fund in number 2. What does that mean? Expedited fee trust fund. Well, what that means is that some campaign donor decided he wanted to do things faster, paid off the right people, and he got agenda item number 2 placed on there. So the pay-to-play continues to work. Congratulations. Then we have the Metrolink station. Managing and operation of the California State University Metrolink station. The next speaker can really tell you that the ridership is way down in our Metrolink and train systems. So you're building white elephants. You should not enter into 20-year agreements to fund white elephants. The future is Uber, Lyft. The future is people driving these self-driving cars. Pretty soon you just program your car and it will drive you to work, and you can sit in the back and text and go on your laptop and read your messages from the city. So item 4, targeted car sharing and mobility options and disadvantages communities pilot program. It's garbage. The Air Resources Board should be disbanded because the California Air Resources Board is an unelected, unaccountable body of terrorists. They should be absolutely thrown out of the state. They've done more to destroy jobs than anything in this state. So for you to be engaging in business with the California Air Resources Board may be unconstitutional under the California Constitution because it's a state agency, and similar to the federal government, a state should not be treating itself over the governor's office. And I think the county level at least should be the principal bargainer in this and not a city. Then we have the municipal code. The parking of vehicles for private sale. Yes, you really don't like this, but there's a new business. People sell used cars and park them on certain public streets. In CD3, they have a whole set of them on Sherman Oaks between Tampa and Mason. And you can drive down there and pick out the car of your dreams for cheap. And these are people who work on the weekends fixing up cars and reselling them as a side business. What the hell is wrong with that? That's innovation. That's people privately conducting something to make money for their families or put food on the table, and you want to destroy it. This is a good thing. It should be allowed. And especially on Van Nuys Boulevard, which looks like a dump, so at least we're using Van Nuys Boulevard for something good other than prostitutes, strip bars, and motels. I'd rather be selling used cars from private parties on that street than having 18 hotels between Sherman Oaks and Sherman Way and this whole area in Sepulveda Boulevard. Yeah, the whole street with motels. It's ridiculous. Massage parlors all over the place. Close them down and allow the people to sell the private cars. And then we have the Parking Reform Working Group. Well, I have a recommendation. Get rid of all of these parking enforcement Hitler Nazis, especially in the valley, that go onto private property and ticket people that have the placard in their car but don't have it in the window. They continually do this in Woodland Hills and Tarzana. They go into these fast food places. Somebody pulls up to get a burger. They got a disabled placard. They jump out of the car. They have it in the car. They come out. They get a ticket. It's because they lay in wait to make money on people. And these so-called rush hour traffic zones from 4 to 7 o'clock where you tow people away on Ventura Boulevard 3 to 6 p.m., abolish it. It's wrong. It's against business, and it's illegal.
Thank you, Mr. Spindler. Mr. Walsh, you'd submitted 3 cards, so I can give you 3 minutes.
John Walsh, blogging at HollywoodHighlands.org or J. Walsh Confidential, tweeting at Hollywood Dems. I won't even need the full 3 minutes. I'd just like to speak on people who try to sell their cars on the street. They're mostly white people like me, okay? So they're allowed to sell their cars on the street unless it's in a white neighborhood, and then, of course, they have to move because the white people come to you and give you and get these restrictions. Nobody should be able to sell their car on the street as little as they should be able to sell a taco on the street or their body on the street. The street is for walking, okay? It's out of control. When I was here under Bradley in 66 when I moved here, 76 when I moved here, everything was calm, controlled. And they gave me rent. Bradley gave me rent control. And you people gave me shit.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. We have 2 general public comment cards. I'll take those now. Rosie Cato and Antonia Ramirez.
How many minutes per, sir?
1 minute.
Good afternoon, members of the committee. My name is Rosie Cato. I'm a board member of the West LA Sawtell Neighborhood Council. However, I come before the committee today as a registered voter, a constituent and homeowner of Council District 11. Residents demand to know why DOT is not being held to the budget recommendation of May 21st, 2015, file number 15-0600-S62 of meeting a 6-month benchmark in processing parking petitions. Residents demand to know why DOT continues to delay submission of the resolution to grant new parking restrictions for Preferential Parking District 49, located in the Sawtell Japantown community of Council District 11. 120,000 Japanese and Japanese Americans were stripped of their civil rights and incarcerated during World War II for about 3.5 years. The Sawtell Japantown area allowed persons of Japanese descent to purchase property, and many families still live in the area. Among the petitioners, 86 households of Japanese and Asian descent signed parking petitions to protect their rights.
Thank you.
However, they're now being railroaded using a biased survey conducted by Jeff Jackelberger and Mott Smith of CAA
your time is up.
to sacrifice their quality of life at the expense of local businesses and their customers who repeatedly
your time is up.
the history of the area and the families who live there.
Ms. Ramirez?
Thank you very much.
I have a speaker card in for number 5, so for your convenience, I'll let you do 2 minutes now.
Oh, thank you very much. I appreciate that. I'll begin with my public comments. For those of us who are residing in the downtown area, we have a bit of a problem on the weekends because you have a lot of events. that basically makes all the buses go on detour. So if you are, let's say, First and Broadway, you're not able to catch a bus anywhere in that vicinity. You're not able to go anywhere pretty much. It's a long walk to the nearest bus stop. And many times they're on detour, and again, many of the signs get removed from the bus stop locations. So I would love to see a bus during the events in the Grand Park area and in the vicinity. During those events, I would love to see you have buses, or maybe one that will take you out of the events throughout the day, and a bus that will bring you into the events throughout the day. Many people who are wanting to come into the events on the weekends, they get stopped somewhere, let's say on Spring and on Hill and 10th. So they have to walk all that distance into the downtown area to partake in the events. So that's a bit of a problem. And the second part of is item number 5. There are several vehicles that are parked, illegally parked, and they are cars for sale. They are on Ventura Boulevard from Universal City to Woodland Hills, then on downtown from Wilshire, on Wilshire Boulevard from downtown to Santa Monica Beach, and all of Lawson in East LA. You've got all these cars that mostly belong to gangbangers, and what they use these as hubs for drug deals, weapon sales, and prostitution as well inside the vehicle. And you do pay money to have the luxury to use these old clunkers for prostitution. Yeah, a little tacky, but they are used as lodging vehicles. So again, that's a monopoly that's being used by the gangbangers on several of these streets. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Ramirez.
Thank you.
Colleagues, I was going to recommend for consent approval items 2 through 4. Is there any objection?
No objection.
All right. I was also going to recommend item number 1, but there's some speaker cards on that. So we have 4 speakers for item number 1. Nancy Ramos, Fatima Castañeda Gutierrez, Hillary Danner, and Sylvia Robledo.
Mr. Chair, how
Go
many
ahead.
minutes?
1 minute each.
Hi. Okay, hi. My name is Hillary Danner. I am a member, a parent at the Arroyo Seco Museum Science School that is right there on the section next to the school where there are at any, it's also my front yard. At any time, 10 to 15 RVs that are parked there 24/7. I took lots of pictures today. Our children, my child for the last 9 years, both of my children have had to walk past trash, human waste, needles, and all sorts of things that they've told me they make their stomachs sick. They like to even ride their bike to school. They have to cross 2 more streets because they don't want to go past it. I have lots of pictures today, and they are not moving. There are benches with potted plants next to them, barbecues, like it's a full-on community happening there. And if I could submit these, I'd be happy to. That's it.
You should know, unless any of you have objections, it's the intention of the committee to approve this item.
Oh.
So.
Hi, my name is Dr. Fatima Castañeda Gutierrez. I'm the principal there at Arroyo Seco Museum Science Magnet School, and I just want to say that I appreciate the time that you are taking to listen to us today and the work, more importantly, that it took to make this happen. I'm wearing a hat today in honor of Red Ribbon Week. We are celebrating Hats Off to Health today at school, and just want to let you know that the students there also appreciate the time that you've taken to make this happen for them. They wanted me to come today to speak to you on behalf of them, on behalf of their security, on behalf of the sanitation of the community there. And while we are one principal and 2 parents sitting here, please know that there is a whole community that appreciates your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Nancy Ramos, and I represent the community of Arroyo Seco Museum Science Magnet, both past and present. I've been a member of that community for about 10 years now, and I, too, now want to thank you, being that it's going to be passed. I want to echo what Dr. Castañeda said, and Hillary, as a parent. Our kids have been exposed to their safety. We've seen all community members have seen drug paraphernalia, sex paraphernalia, used condoms on the floor, human waste, kids walking to school and from school, being not encountered, but being too close to have an individual be under the influence, whether it would be alcohol or drugs. The safety of our kids are our concern. We know it's a very sensitive subject with the homeless situation, but really not in the vicinity where kids are walking to and from school. That's our concern. We thank you for your time.
Thank you, council members, for providing us the opportunity to come here and speak before you. I'm the deputy for this particular area, which is called Sycamore Grove, for Council Member Gilbert Cedillo. I think of all the issues, as a deputy, this is the one that I received the most calls for. I also live 2 miles from our district office. I park my city car there, and I walk to work every day for about 2 miles, and I also walk through this particular area because I also want to know what these kids are being exposed to. So I thank these individuals for coming here today, these parents and the principal. They took their time off of work, and we thank you for your support and your vote yes on this item. Thank you.
Thank you. So without objection, that item is approved.
Thank you.
That brings us to item number 5. We have 2 speaker cards. Pamela, I believe, Cardillo, and Steve Jaramillo.
Item number 5 is the Fuentes-Blumenfeld motion relative to requesting the city attorney to prepare and present an ordinance that to prohibit the parking of vehicles for sale signs on the east side of Sepulveda Boulevard between San Jose Street and Chatsworth Street, both sides of Hubbard Street between Glen Oaks Boulevard and Herrick Avenue, and both sides of Van Nuys Boulevard between Remick Avenue and Laurel Canyon Boulevard.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Go ahead.
Okay. Hi, my name is Steve Jaramillo with the Office of Councilman Felipe Fuentes. I am talking on item 5. I just want to first thank the Transportation Committee for hearing this item. Our Sylmar District Office for the past year has been receiving concerns regarding an influx of for sale vehicles on certain major corridors in the Council District 7. Residents of the community of Mission Hills, Sylmar, and Pocoima are facing a bunch of issues with for sale vehicles, monopolizing street parking, creating visual blight, causing vehicle and pedestrian traffic. For instance, in the community of Mission Hills, we've been receiving a lot of calls from concerned constituents such as Carl Kreiser, Betty Lay, Pamela Cardillo about these vehicles parking, taking up space. As well as in the community of Pacoima, we are getting calls from the Mary Immaculate School about taking away all their parking, eliminating all the business in the area, such as My Gusta Tamales, McDonald's, El Marimero Restaurant. And also in the community of Sylmar, in front of our district office, they are blocking and creating traffic concerns in which we cannot safely get out of our vehicles or safely get out of our plaza without having a lot of these for sale vehicles or these moving car lots. I encourage you for a yes vote so we can help mediate the situation. We already dealt with the East Valley Traffic Office, we dealt with parking enforcement, but we're trying to explore all options we have. So if you guys can consider this item, I greatly appreciate it.
You'd like us to continue it or approve it?
No.
Approve it.
Approve it, yeah.
Okay, all right, yes.
Yes, we want approval. My name is Pamela Cardillo, and thank you for pronouncing my name right because nobody ever gets it right. Thank you. Yes. This is regarding Sepulveda, right at San Jose Street, and if you can imagine, I don't know how much you understand the valley, but at this particular place is 1 mile approximately to the 118 freeway, and there's a Sepulveda on-ramp heading east, there's Sepulveda on-ramp heading west. There's a lot of traffic in the morning, and it's very distracting watching all these cars and trucks that are for sale. It's one of these things where you're driving down the street and you're thinking, oh, look at that car over there. That's a really pretty 74 El Camino. Look at those cool tires and rims, and pretty soon you're thinking about the car and the truck and you're not thinking about the traffic. Also, we are really on it 24/7 with the Council District Office regarding trash. We are on a major cleanup campaign. We're doing really well, so if you can help us with this, because the trash accumulating has to go.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Seeing no objection, we'll approve item 5 as well. We have been joined by Councilmember Huizar. Mr. Huizar, before you arrived, we approved items numbers 1 through 4 on consent. Would you like to concur with us on those items?
Sure, if I could concur with those. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Clark, please have that noted.
Very good.
So we will move now to item number 6. I see that there may be some comment cards being submitted now. I'm going to stop accepting cards now.
Item number 6 is a communication from the mayor relative to LADOT's parking program and the initiatives in connection with the parking reform working group and related matters.
Thank you for getting the room in order and quiet back there. All right, so this item here has to deal with, as the CLA just indicated, LADOT's parking program and the work product of the parking reform working group, which started as a grassroots movement to reform how we do parking here in Los Angeles, and the working group itself was initiated by the mayor's office, which helped pull it together and sort of steered its work over the course of a long number of months, and they've done some incredible work. This is an important issue for this committee to consider. Parking is one of the ways that most Los Angelinos, or most Angelinos, actually intersect with the city of LA. The way they experience the city is either through their DWP bill or through a parking meter or a parking ticket. And if we don't make that experience simple and fair and transparent, then we do a disservice to the people of Los Angeles, and we create a very sour impression of what Los Angeles is. My first motion when I became a member of the council was to repeal the city's policy regarding issuing tickets at broken meters. And it was amazing how much that resonated with people. People really feel connected in not a particularly positive way with their experiences with parking fines in Los Angeles, and their attitudes towards Los Angeles are often shaped by that experience. And the refrain I've heard from folks repeatedly is that whether it's their building inspectors or it's a parking fine or whatever service it is from the city, they really want the city to be on their sides and not on their backs. And one of the things that this parking reform working group has really focused on is how to come up with more sensible parking policies for the city of Los Angeles, more equitable policies for the city of Los Angeles, and come up with a sort of a framework for parking policies in Los Angeles that really is about making the city be more on our residents' sides and not on their backs. So I want to thank them for their work and ask them to come up and report on their recommendations. And I should say, as they're getting ready, this is a big issue. It's a complex issue with many, many parts. You will hear from them various different recommendations. My recommendation as chair of the committee is that we not take a global or an omnibus action today, but this be the first conversation, and then we sort of break the component parts and recommendations down into their own council files for individual consideration. So that'll be sort of where I'll be going towards the end of this. Good afternoon. Please identify yourselves for the records.
Yes, my name is Juan Matute. I'm the Associate Director of the UCLA Institute of Transportation Studies. I was also the chair of the LA Mayor's Parking Reform Working Group. I'm joined by 2 of the 5 co-chairs.
I am Jay Bieber. I was the co-chair, one of the co-chairs of the management group from the Parking Working Group.
And I'm Stephen Vincent, and I was also co-chair of one of the committees of the working group and the founder of the LA Parking Freedom Initiative, which got this ball rolling about almost 2 years ago.
So the group itself was comprised of about 24 people from business improvement districts, myself from academia, others from businesses, residents, people involved with neighborhood councils. And we took a holistic approach to looking at the parking experience in Los Angeles, primarily from the user's perspective, but we also had a lot of interactions with the city that brought in the various departments and bureaus that touch parking's perspective into that. So what follows is a sampling of our recommendations from the 40-page report that we adopted in February.
a lot of the recommendations that I'm going to talk about today, actually two of them in particular, we had a lot of conversations with Donald Shoup, someone whose name you may know, who is the gentleman who wrote a very famous book called The High Cost of Free Parking. And as we were looking at this, we asked for his expertise, and a lot of the recommendations come specifically from those conversations. This first slide just basically gives you a sense of how the breakdown is in terms of the parking tickets that are given out in the city of Los Angeles. You will note that over 50% of the citations were written for street cleaning and meter violations, and then obviously it goes down from there, and those are about half and half, so about 25% each of those. So the question is as to why are reforms necessary. I'm sure you've heard a lot of input from your constituents about the kinds of things that happen to them with regards to parking. And just for example, you know, a lot of people say, well, you know, if you get a parking ticket, you're a scofflaw or whatever. Most of these tickets are for relatively minor violations, you know, overstaying the meter or being a couple of inches outside the line of the parking space and things like that. And when we looked at the reforms, we said, how can we move more fair to people, but also not encourage people to break the rules, but we also want to be fair to people. So that's the approach that we took. And so we looked at a couple of recommendations for reform, and this is just a quick list of what we'll be going through today. And so the first thing we looked at was fines and enforcement, and we started with agreement on a couple of principles. First, that parking citations are only to be used to encourage compliance. That's not the purpose of fines to raise revenue. The amount, I'm hearing laughter. The amount of the fine
I'm sorry, let me interrupt you for a second, Mr. Bieber. Mr. Spindler, if you interrupt the meeting again or disrupt the meeting, I'm going to have you removed. Please have Mr. Spindler removed. I'm sorry for the disruption, Mr. Bieber. Please continue.
Okay. So just to clarify that these were our principles as to what the policies should be for the city of Los Angeles. The amount of the fine should not unduly burden the lowest income residents, and the amount of the fine should not unfairly penalize first-time or infrequent offenders. So with those guiding principles, and in consultation with Dr. Shoup, we came up with a plan, and the plan basically was to adopt a tier fine schedule for non-safety related violations and allow traffic officers to issue warning tickets through their handheld device. This is a suggested fine schedule. We had to start somewhere with what the lowest fine would be, and rather than just kind of pick it out of the air, we chose the current median hourly wage for the city of Los Angeles as reported by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So the first fine for the same violation in a year would start at $23. If you got a second ticket for the same offense, the second one would be $33, the third one would be $48, and the fourth one would be $68. And you can see that those fine amounts go up incrementally. So it's obviously $10 for the first one, and then more in between each one of them. The benefits that we thought that the city would get from this is beyond being more fair, is that you would get faster payment from citizens. If somebody got a $23 ticket, they're more likely to be able to afford it and also more likely to pay it rather than challenge it. So you would have lower adjudication costs. It's less regressive on the members of our society who are financially challenged, and the punishment would more accurately fit the crime. And you would also get greater public acceptance of the fact that there do have to be some sort of fines and penalties when people don't follow the rules that the city has set up for parking. So obviously, this is something we don't expect you guys to adopt today, but we're asking that you'll probably want to ask for a report back on the economic effects of creating a tiered fine structure and the logistics of implementing this warning notice system. The next thing I want to talk about is parking meter policies, and those are things where we talked about the market-based pricing of parking meters in the city of Los Angeles. The city is already doing this in places in the city with LA Express Park. We think that that has been working rather well in the areas that that is being used, and we encourage the expansion of that. But along with the expansion of that, we had two more suggestions as to how we could make parking at a meter more fair and more encouraging and better for the people that want to visit our business districts. And the first thing is to have an elimination of the arbitrary time limits. Right now we have 1 hour, 2 hour, 3 hour. The reason those are there is to encourage people not to stay in the meter spot all day long. But most people don't stay overtime. They do their business and they leave. There are some people that have to stay longer. But we also have to have a way of encouraging people not to use it as their own personal parking spot all day. So what Dr. Shoup recommended was something that they are doing in Albany, New York, which is that they tier price their meters. So what they do is the first 2 hours, like we have in the city of Los Angeles in many places, might be $1 an hour. The third hour might be $2 or $3. The fourth hour might be $4 or $5. So it gets incrementally more expensive the longer you stay there. But if you need to stay in the spot and you're willing to pay that price, you would be able to stay there and until it got very, very expensive for you. And that works very, very well in Albany. They find that they still have the turnover that they need, but they also don't kick people out of a spot who do need to be there for a longer period of time. The second part of that is to implement a payment in, payment out system. The way this would work is like a parking structure works, where you take a ticket and you go in and then when you leave, you just pay for the amount of time that you've been in that structure. Nobody has to worry about the time running out on them. They don't have to worry about getting a ticket. So what we were recommending, and we have been told from DOT, although there are some technical challenges, that the meters that we have can be upgraded to be able to do this, which is if you have a credit card or pay by phone, you could start the meter running when you arrive, and when you leave, you simply swipe your card again or stop the meter from running, and you get charged for the amount of time that you are there. The benefit to this, and we'll talk about that, is that the prices will reflect the market demands. It would encourage turnover, as we are currently doing. It's less guesswork for the public. There might be fewer violations, which is a good thing because people are not violating. And the city would probably get more revenue from this system. And the reason is because if you think about it, there are a number of people whose meters may run out but not get a ticket. There are a few that get a very high ticket. We're much better off getting those few extra 5-10 minutes all across the board than we are of just ticketing a few people who overstay by a few minutes. It would lower the enforcement and adjudication costs, and again, it would get greater public acceptance. So we're suggesting that the next action would be to ask for a report back from DOT on the logistics and economic benefits and possibly putting in a pilot program somewhere to see how this would work for the city. The next item is reevaluating preferential parking districts. There's more information on this in our full report, but we just want to mention just two specific items on here, which is that there is a call to include representation by all affected stakeholders, including business owners and employees of adjacent business districts. Right now, preferential parking districts are only accessible by people who are residents of the area, and we feel that there should be some input from other people that are affected when those are put into place. Also, the programs generally don't pay for themselves, so we think that the city should look at what the cost benefits are if the city is losing money on them, whether they make sense. And so overall, to evaluate the criteria used to establish preferential parking districts. And so the next action would be, again, to report back from DOT on the possible pilot program for doing that. And I'm going to turn it back to Juan.
There was a lot of interest and discussion in our group in returning parking revenues back to the neighborhoods in which they were generated and using that to enhance mobility, accessibility. So one of our guiding principles from our initial points of agreement document was that parking management should be regarded as a core city service and managed as such. And part of that would be to look at the revenues that are generated from fines, from meters, from other fees, and use that in order to help the city achieve some of its accessibility but also sustainability objectives in neighborhoods where they're being generated. So the parking is the interface between the transportation and land use system, and it's hard to, there's so many things that can be influenced by parking policy that relate to the city's social, environmental, and economic goals. So we have a recommendation for a parking and access enterprise fund, which would be an evolution of the current special parking and revenue fund that would return money back into communities to be used not just for additional parking, but also car sharing services, bicycle parking, bike share, bus and shuttle van stops, electric vehicle charging stations, safety improvements, beautification, and other streetscape improvements. This is a very big change for how the SPRF and current parking revenues would be utilized, so we're recommending a report back on the economic effects.
And I might add that we met on the phone with the parking directors of many cities across the country that have adopted this exact model or something very similar to it. So it is a trend in city government to move towards a special parking, towards a fund of this nature, an enterprise fund type of a model. It's something that's going on nationwide.
We also looked at the rise in e-commerce and home deliveries, and there's just year-over-year incredible growth in different services being available to replace a lot of shopping trips where people would go to the store to purchase everything from groceries to their diapers and other supplies. So we're recommending a freight parking pilot program where the City of LA would work in certain districts with some of the larger freight companies, implying some best practices from other cities that have adopted new programs in response to these increases in, especially in home deliveries, but in other freight-related movements. And we have further documentation in the full report. Street cleaning we saw was the #1 fine. It generates a lot of revenue, but I think it's some of the most expensive revenue in terms of a strained relationship with constituents that the city generates. So we have a lot of recommendations related to street cleaning, both in terms of making street cleaning smarter, so GPS on the BSS street sweeping vehicles so that somebody can actually check where the vehicle is, not just enforcement, but members of the public can see if a street sweeping vehicle has gone through. Looking at using information and communication technology to, instead of having that 2-hour window always in effect, relaxing that, maybe in certain cases, if you know that you can get the street sweeping vehicle through every time in an hour window, narrowing the posted sign down to an hour window and having it be more flexible. And there's been a number of recommendations, and we reviewed early drafts of a change in a residential parking restriction and street sweeping signs that take a design-oriented approach. And then an additional recommendation is just smarter parking and smarter curb management. So coding the curbs and releasing this information publicly. I know my insurer has done this, and I have a little device in my vehicle, so I get a push notification whenever I'm parked in a street sweeping zone, and when it's time for street sweeping. And that's something that, with the right data and the right partnerships with app providers, could be pushed out to everyone. And I think that's a great message of the city helping people avoid fines in the future. We also have recommendations for dynamic signage, QR codes to help interpret complex parking totem poles, and having two-way conversations for the public. So we have a 40 pages of recommendations in our report, but we didn't get to everything that relates to parking. It's a comprehensive and complex area. So we have a lot of recommendations for future areas for the city to look at, and we recommend that this be the start rather than the conclusion of a process to reevaluate the city's parking policies, parking needs, and parking management approaches. And members of the LA Parking Reform Working Group would like to be a part of that ongoing process, along with city staff and committees.
Let me thank you again for your work. I mean, this was incredibly thorough, incredibly comprehensive, detailed, visionary. I'm really very, very impressed by the work. And I want to thank the folks from the mayor's office and the departments in other cities as well who worked with you to help come up with this. I think there's some really great stuff in here, some of it is great and we should do it right away. Some of it's great and we need to think about it. And some of it's intriguing and we really need to ponder it for a while. I think you're right. This is the beginning, not the end of a conversation. But I want to assure you that at least as long as I'm chair of the committee, this isn't going to be a study that gets put on a shelf somewhere. I want us to move forward on a number of different things. Most of them do require report backs and see the next steps and study them. And then there's the stuff that you didn't get to because you presented your sort of consensus recommendations. But I saw on that last slide stuff about disabled placard abuse and the adjudication process. And I think those are all things that are the proper purview of this committee. And I'm eager to work with all of you in making sure that we take all of that up over the next couple of years. Just a couple questions. There's a few things that you touched on I just wanted to comment on. I really loved that you focused on Express Park as something that needs to be expanded. I'm eager to get it happening faster in the city of LA. The success of it downtown in Mr. Weezar's district has been phenomenal. I mean, it has increased the use of the available curb space. It has reduced the average cost of parking, and it's actually increased revenue. So it's been really a win-win-win. And it's the kind of thing we need to expand around the city. In your study of other cities, have you seen this model used successfully elsewhere?
I'm most aware of San Francisco. They have an SF Park program where they rolled it out slightly before LA Express Park, and it's been a successful model in terms of helping people find available parking spaces, so reducing the frustration associated with parking, and also it's something that's expanding throughout that city.
I would say in the investigation that we did, the pricing of parking meters and generally the pricing of parking in general wasn't something that we found was on the minds of people. It was at anywhere near the top of the list of issues that people were having with the parking system. So pricing itself, not really something that's an issue, though. We did find that demand-based pricing is the best way to go.
So one of the things that I wanted to try a link between two different things that you talked about. I love the success of the Express Park. I love that it's demand-based, and when there's a greater demand for parking, the price is greater. That's worked very well downtown. I think it would work well in a number of places. I think it would work particularly well in Venice Beach, for instance, and other places in my district, as well as other places around the city. You also talked about changing the fine structure in Los Angeles, and you talked about a tiered fine structure, which I find very intriguing. You having a hard time hearing me? Yeah? Okay. Sorry, I have a bit of a cold. You talked about the tiered structure. In areas where we have express parking and there's a demand-based price for that parking spot, would it make any sense to have a fine system that is graduated based on the demand? So that if it costs, $1 to park there for an hour, you have a low parking fine. If it costs $15 to park there, you have a higher parking fine. So that the fine fluctuates with the demand just as the base price does.
That's not something that we looked at, although as part of the report back on this item, it's certainly something that can be looked at. We want to again be careful that whatever the fine is and however it's implemented, that really it's used to encourage the compliance as opposed to a revenue generation. So if, for example, a $23 fine would be less than what it would cost to park there all day, obviously you would have to take that into account and make adjustments. Obviously other areas would be different, but it wouldn't just be that fine structure would not necessarily be specific for just meters. It would be for other types of little things as well. The important thing in that is to let people know what it is. So as long as people have that information so they're not surprised later on, that's an important component of it.
And I think the original purpose of these fines was not for revenue generation, but to compensate society for the costs imposed by parking violations, and the cost would be higher in a high-demand area. So I think that would be in tune with the original objectives of parking fines. And I want to acknowledge Mott Smith, a co-chair, who I've invited up to answer some of the questions.
And good to see you, Mott.
I see you.
Are there schools of thought, whether it's from Don Shoup or others who spend their lives thinking about parking, or good chunks of their lives thinking about parking, about whether or not there is a good factor by which to set a parking fine as a certain percentage of what the parking rate is to begin with?
Well, we started out by just observing what's happening with people, on the street. And a $68 fine for being 30 seconds late getting back to your meter, for most of us in this room, probably not that big of a deal, but for many, many, many Angelenos, it's a big deal. And, if they've got to choose between paying that $68 fine within, 21 days, or putting food on the table, or paying the gas bill, or the electric bill, or whatever it happens to be, they're probably going to put that ticket in a drawer. And, of course, we know what happens after that. The ticket doubles. It becomes even more of a problem. It becomes an escalating problem for people that are living, on the edge economically in the city, which is quite a lot of people. So it ends up being basically, a tax on a regressive tax on the poor in the city, and that is a real problem that we need to address. Now, where a fine is necessary for a public safety reason, say like a fire hydrant or something like that, we're not advocating that should be lowered. But where there's no real public safety issue involved, a more reasonable level of a fine needs to be set, and we chose the $23 an hour as the Bureau of Labor Statistics hourly wage for the LA metropolitan area as a starting point. And this is a real issue for people. It's something that it really affects their lives in a very direct way, and that's part of the thinking behind it.
And we recommended the reduction of fines in tandem with other measures that would obtain compliance through measures other than the stick of the fine.
Let me ask you about the street sweeping stuff, because I think you've hit on another area that really frustrates people, and I think the city has at least gotten better in recent years about not ticketing people when the street sweeping isn't happening. One of your recommendations is making sure that the city doesn't ticket after the sweeper has already gone by, and creating through electronic means ways of notifying folks that it's okay to park here now, even though the posting may still say it's not, because the sweeper has already gone by. So I guess a two-part question on that is, in terms of the technological fix that you propose, what cities are ahead of us in that regard, and what do we do about sort of the social equity aspect of that, where there are just some neighborhoods in Los Angeles that are a lot more wired than others?
I think that those are all good questions that I think we have to look at for when the study comes back as to how to do this. We will say that particular recommendation came from the president of the Board of Public Works, Kevin James, and so we sort of tagged on to. We said, oh well, that makes sense. It wasn't generated from this committee, but we want to support him on that because we think that would make sense. But certainly by narrowing the time limit that people don't have to park there, you solve a lot of that problem, because right now if it's 2 hours, that's 4 hours a week, which people can't park in their neighborhood. In some neighborhoods, there's no other place for them to park.
Yeah. And then the final area I wanted to ask about was one where, in most of this, I was sort of on the same page. There's one where I'm instinctively not, but I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk to me a little bit about it, and that is the preferential parking districts. One of your recommendations was to make sure that some of the other stakeholders, that the businesses near a preferential parking district are involved, it sounded like, in the creation of a preferential parking district, or whether or not it should be created. In my experience, and I think certainly Mr. Koretz, I'm familiar with parts of Westwood, there are areas where there are preferential parking districts because the burden from the local business community and the parking needs have been so great that it basically took away all the parking from residents. And you just expressed a concern about residents who may lose parking for 4 hours because of street sweeping. Some of us have neighbors who've lost parking for an entire evening or entire weekend because of the local business community. And for many, preferential parking districts were created as a mitigation for the impact of businesses that, for whatever reason, whether it's through a variance or through grandfathering, are underparked. And so the parking is going to happen in the nearby residential neighborhoods. Why should we be widening the circle of those involved in creating the mitigation to those who are causing the problem that needs to be mitigated?
Matt, do you want to start?
Do you want to start, Jay?
Well, actually, I was either going to defer to you or Susan, who led this particular item. So whatever you guys want to decide.
Is Susan your...
also on our committee.
I think
So.
Susan would be great. So I'll chime in after Susan.
Okay.
I'll start just by saying I think it's a fairly blunt instrument. The variables are the amount of time you can park and the times in which the instrument is in effect. I think there's an opportunity for something that's more performance-based and more tailored to specific applications. And Susan, did you want to add?
Sure. I don't know if any of you have been following some of the issues with the Hollywood sign. I live in Hollywood. I have a small business over on Franklin Avenue, which is in a residential area. Even though it's on Franklin Avenue, there's only 3 blocks of business. I have to say we do impact the neighborhood, but I've been there for 35 years, and there was never any parking. It's always been blamed on someone. What's happening up in Beechwood, and this is why specifically we're interested, not in allowing customers to park. That wasn't the issue that I was really focused on in this, but it was allowing in areas where there are small mom-and-pop businesses to not be driven out of business because there's no alternative. Many of the businesses we're talking about, there is no alternative parking around. The businesses are old business communities that were designed to be in residential areas. It was part of the urban plan. And as people who live in their homes don't use their garage, or as the impact of tourism in the Beechwood Canyon area, there really isn't a problem with the businesses that are up in Beechwood Canyon. There is a problem with the residents wanting permit parking, and the permit parking is going to close down effectively a 100-year-old business area. All the businesses were really asking for was that the employees, it's 1.5 miles up the canyon. There's no other place to park, and there's no place certainly to park in Hollywood or for small businesses to buy parking for their employees. So the question was, can we have employees able to buy into a parking district so that they can park and go to work, not for customers. I think it's a real critical issue right now because of what's happening in Beechwood Canyon. The businesses are being blamed. It has torn a 100-year-old community apart because there are certain residents that are totally against permit parking. There was an agreement from 2 years ago that from the businesses agreed to that permit parking would be on weekends, which certainly affects their business, but doesn't come within 2 blocks of the business district. And then south of the business district is mostly some single-family homes, but also a lot of old apartment buildings, bungalows, things like that. So all of those people have no parking and never have anyway. So when you allow for permit parking districts without thinking about it, just because residents are asking for it, and you don't do the mitigating effects, Lake Hollywood, which is all single-family residents but have a big park, are not allowed to have permit parking in quite a large areas, so people that are now restricted from parking at the top of Beechwood have moved over there.
Right.
So I think it's just poorly thought out, and specifically in areas where there are no alternatives for business parking.
And just to make it clear that the recommendation wasn't specific to that particular issue, but that was sort of an example of it. And so just looking at it throughout the city, where are those particular places where it would make sense to get the input from others?
And I suspect, I just need to move on a little bit because we're short on time. I suspect that a number of the folks who filled out speaker cards are here to testify on that particular recommendation, so we'll hear more from that. But before I go to I'm sorry, I need to get to my colleagues. Before I go to the public speaker cards, I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues who may have questions. Mr. Huizar?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Bonin, and thank you for your leadership on this. And to everyone who was involved in this is comprehensive, it's timely, and I think, as Mr. Bonin mentioned, a yearning for some reform from the public. just this morning, I got a tweet or Facebook post, I don't know what it was, but somebody mentioned to me how there was some filming in Boyle Heights and that all the block had gotten tickets. And it wasn't, the person posting this wasn't so much focused on, okay, well, they got the tickets, was these are low-income folks who have to pay this huge ticket now. And so I'm very happy that you're focused on the regressive nature of our current system and how we could alleviate that. It's not so much, we want to, it's not so much for revenue, it's not so much, it's more just correct behavior that if it's ongoing that we need to correct, right? But anyway, I love the focus on that. Lots to discuss, and I know we're going to have ongoing discussions about this. My one question today is on the enterprise fund. I think in the past with our SPRF account, I think I got that acronym correctly, our SPRF accounts, they would generally stay in the area from which the revenue was derived. And then through our budget deliberations and our need to cut back on our budget, that started going over to the general fund. The SPRF funds now go to the general fund. Should we move in the direction to now set up this enterprise fund and start directing some of the revenues derived from parking meters, et cetera, to this enterprise fund? Would you suggest, or was a discussion raised, whether those funds stay within that area that they were derived, or do they just go to a general enterprise fund? So, for example, if we do find that an enterprise, some of the revenues coming from a particular area, that's because there's more activity there, maybe that area needs improved management, correct? Traffic management. So do we now proportionally put back in the money that we're getting in revenue, or do we just put it in the enterprise fund and let the enterprise fund kind of figure out where it goes? Have you guys talked about that?
We looked at that, and we, like we said before, conversed with a lot of cities across the country that have adopted this kind of model. And what we found is that there's no boilerplate formula for this. It's really based on, well, what do you want to accomplish, with the money? And so it could be a mix of the two. You could have a formula where a certain portion of it goes back to the local area, maybe through bids or other local organizations of that nature, and then a portion of the funds goes to the central fund, which then invests it in general in the system to make improvements where it's strategically needed, be most strategically beneficial for the entire city to make those kinds of investments. So it's really based on, well, what do you want to accomplish? And you structure it that way.
I think the sentiment was that high revenues or high fines signal the need and to invest in better management approaches and new ways of signage and other things in order for more people to avoid the fine. There was concern about the equity implications between council districts for council districts that don't have a lot of meters or fine revenue, and what that would mean in terms of investment if more of the source of this type of investment came from this fund.
And Councilman, when we went back and spoke with DOT staffers about the history of this, because there's a lot of mythology about the history of the SPRF in the city. One of the things that we heard was it wasn't simply that the money was needed for budgetary purposes in lean years. It was also that the city had trouble spending the money given the particular constraints placed on it. And so one of our recommendations is to actually expand the menu of things that the money could be used for, so it could be actually brought up to current standards for best practices.
Yeah. Okay. That needs further discussion. I just thought it'd be good to continue brainstorming that to see what makes sense. An enterprise fund obviously could create more equity in terms of across the board where it's needed, and could even fix the issue if we have more activity in a particular area. Obviously, the enterprise fund will be directing more funds in that area to correct and assist the management practices that we have for this. But at the same time, if it's being generated mostly from certain areas, there's actually a need there. So we have to balance those two areas. But I'm certainly looking forward to continuing this conversation because, this has so much potential to help our management here. And doesn't begin with, but a very important component is that enterprise fund, and then how do we put those dollars and attach to the new ideas that you guys come up with. So thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Martinez?
I just had a question. Are we, in terms of what we're doing next, in terms of process, are we asking the department to then come back with a series of reports?
Yes.
To figure out on these issues and the feasibility of a tiered
Yeah.
fine system? Okay.
Would it be useful if I gave what I was going to recommend for report backs?
Yeah, I was just
Okay.
wondering what we're going to do next, because I have another meeting that I have
Okay,
to step
yeah.
out for.
It-
And then also, moving forward, does this committee continue to exist to sort of advise us on parking issues moving forward, or how does?
Well, I think
What
that's
are
the
the
open
plans?
question. I mean, we finished our process, our initial process, which was coming up with the final report. So the question is, we'll need some direction from you or from the mayor's office or whatever. Obviously, there are a number of us who would love to continue this because we have, a number of things that are.
We are a valuable resource. I think sitting before you, you have the people that know the most about parking in Los Angeles anywhere, and not only in Los Angeles, but nationwide, since we've really looked at what's going on in the country.
How many folks on your group are familiar with the valley? With the San Fernando Valley?
I'm Sherman Oaks. So.
Northeast San Fernando Valley?
I'm in the valley.
Northeast San Fernando Valley?
And that doesn't mean
You
it
know
could be.
where.
It doesn't necessarily mean it needs to be limited to this group either. So.
So I'm just trying to figure out a way to sort of keep the group intact if you want to continue to serve, and how do we continue to sort of, get advice from you and vice versa on how to move forward on parking issues in the city. That's what I was asking.
Thank
So,
you for that.
Mr. Chair, I didn't want to interrupt, but
Yeah.
if you want to move forward with your recommendations.
Before I go to Mr. Kretza, he'll know what to sort of react to. They're long because there's so many different items, but for the fines and enforcement section of the presentation, I was going to recommend that we direct LADOT and the CAO to report back on the existing fine schedule for parking citations with data to support the relationship between compliance and the citation amount. And also ask LADOT and the CAO to report back on a tiered fine structure and the structure of variable fines, as I was referring to, in Express Park areas. For Express Park in particular, 2 report backs. Ask LADOT to report back with the resources needed to accelerate the delivery of the Express Park program in the areas where the next steps are currently indicated, which are Expo USC, Hollywood, and Venice. And 2 is to direct LADOT to identify the locations for a citywide expansion of Express Park and the resources necessary to implement it. For the freight parking, we're going to recommend a report back on the city's top 20 streets where the largest number of parking citations are issued to delivery and fleet vehicles. That includes, A, an evaluation of existing curbside availability at the top 20 streets, B, the addition expansion of commercial loading zones that could help address freight parking needs, C, a mechanism to identify pre- and post-pilot citation numbers to assess the effectiveness of a pilot program to improve parking compliance, D, the incorporation of a freight and delivery company input and other stakeholders as necessary, and E, a report back on best practices of freight parking programs from other large urban cities. For street cleaning, and don't worry, Mr. Clerk, I have all this written out for you. He was sweating over there. 1 is to direct Street Services, DOT, and the CAO to report on the efforts to incorporate GPS tracking on all street sweeping vehicles, improve communication between sweeping vehicles, traffic control officers, and the public, and the feasibility of creating a digital street cleaning notification system for subscribers. And 2, also under street cleaning, is direct Street Services and the CAO to report back on efforts to map and catalog all routes and reevaluate all street cleaning schedules to ensure that scheduled sweeps do not conflict with hours of peak parking demand, including, because I get this complaint a lot, school pickups and drop-offs. For the evaluating of the preferential and overnight parking districts, what I was recommending is we consider that in Council File 15-0600-X2, which is pending before this committee, that has recommendations for reforming the PPD and OPD system, and also streamlining it to make it more effective and faster for our neighborhoods. 5, experiment with information technology is direct DOT and CAO to report back on the resource needs to electronically inventory all assets in the public right-of-way, also known as Code the Curb. And for the Parking and Access Enterprise Fund, direct LADOT and CAO to report back on the benefits and costs of establishing a parking enterprise fund, pros and cons. And 2, in the meantime, direct LADOT and CAO to report back with a proposed pilot program that would return a portion of local meter revenue to the locations where it's generated for transportation improvements, which neighborhoods have been waiting for a long time. So that way, now that I've made that way members of the committee can react to that, and the speakers who will come up after Mr. Koretz asks questions can also react to that.
May I ask one question about the list there? In the Express Park part of your motion, did that include the recommendation in terms of the tiered cost, and also in terms of eliminating the arbitrary time limits, and also the pay-in payout system, which was part of that recommendation? Is that just sort of a comprehensive stuff?
In the fines and enforcement part, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
I mean, I said that 20 minutes ago. So
right. Just checking.
Mr. Chair, just for clarification, this particular item will we be holding committee pending the multiple report back?
Holding committee, but we'd like to see if we can get separate council files for the individual.
They will be. That is our process.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Fritz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Since a lot of the things were covered, I think I'd probably like to mostly focus on permit parking. First of all, and I don't know if any of you have the answer, maybe staff does, what's the status of adding more staff and improving and enhancing the permit parking department in the office? Anybody know that?
That's a staff question.
Good afternoon. Ken Husting with LADOT Parking Management. And we are planning to report back next month, but I will answer the question right now on a more comprehensive look at PPD reform, as well as the positions that were requested to be filled. We are moving forward with submitted paperwork to fill all the vacancies in the division. We have a couple staffers that are going to be coming on board next week, and we have interviews that will be held, I suspect, before the end of the year for some of the other vacant positions. But we are moving forward with filling all positions.
Okay, and there are a few flaws that I've noticed over the years. I've brought them to the attention of several general managers. I don't know if they're in the process of being addressed or not. One of them is it's very flawed where there's a lot of density, because the guest permits allow you only to park on that block. And if you use my block as an example, because it's a perfect example, we have West Elm, which does a lot of business and generally takes every available parking space during the day. We have some enforcement on weekends, fortunately, but during the week not. And we've had a lot of development where smaller buildings are replaced by huge multifamily projects. And so there's virtually no parking on our street. There are blocks adjacent that aren't so overdeveloped where a guest parker could park. But otherwise, the guest permits are essentially a piece of paper, because most of the time you can't have any guests because there are literally no spaces for them. Why do we continue limiting ourselves to just the block? And if you happen to be in a corner, then they might give you 2 or 3 blocks, which is very strange. So if you happen to have the good fortune to be in one spot, then you have a lot of access. Otherwise, you're in bad shape.
No, I can understand, and I'm hoping that in the council report that's going to be forthcoming, we get to go ahead and address those concerns too, more comprehensively.
And I don't know if any of you looked at those issues or if that was brought to in this process.
The general sentiment was that it's a fairly blunt instrument, and maybe it can vary on more properties of a PPD, so including the number of blocks around a certain address that the PPD applies.
Yeah, certainly one of the recommendations was to reevaluate the criteria for creating them, and that would certainly fall under that. That was just sort of a general sort of catch-all of, yeah, there's a lot of problems in there, and we should look at all of the concerns when we look at how PPDs are handled.
Yeah, do you want to add that?
Yeah, I'd love to add one point, if I may, which is just to underscore. Oh, thanks, Stephen. To underscore what Juan said. Our current PPD system is really out of sync with the best practices nationally as far as how it can be done and how we can balance a variety of needs. our current system creates many winners and losers. And the good systems are much more balanced and allow us to do more nuanced management where we're making sure that every stakeholder has a place to park as opposed to picking one group who's going to win and a bunch of groups are going to lose, including guests.
And also, one thing I've noticed is there's also a problem with the design of the permits. I've done a couple random samples myself of several blocks with some friends, and we found at any one time a good 10% of the permits are unreadable. And this is a consistent problem no matter what, so it's not really the cause of the permit holder. It's the cause of the really crappy system we have where we scribble a Sharpie, whereas there are other places where all of it is stamped in the right inks that they don't fade. Here you have a Sharpie, including for the month, and it would be very easy to purchase 12 different stacks of permits, and the ones that renew in January, you have a nice block January stamp that'll last for a year instead of a scribbled January that fades because you use a crummy Sharpie. The same for the rest of it. It wouldn't be that hard to do all of it in a stamped form that would last the whole year. And in fact, the Sharpie's a blunt enough instrument, literally, that sometimes, even when it's brand new, depending on the handwriting, it's hard to read. And it might misaddress that way. So a lot of problems there, which I hope we might try and resolve. I've seen a redone guest permit that's a little more solid, still doesn't solve any of the problems. And I've heard we're looking at that as possibly a permanent permit as a hanging permit rather than on the car, which would be potentially even worse. So I hope we get a lot of input and we look at these issues carefully because, again, that's a nuisance when people get tickets for faded permits that have nothing to do with anything that's their fault, and that would tick people off. And I've also found, since I've had that experience myself, which triggered some of this, that they then want to see the permit before they replace it. So you actually have to be able to peel it off your bumper, which is also not always that easy. None of it's very practical, it just ticks people off, which is what I think your focus is, to reduce the amount of anger and to implement common sense measures. And I don't know if any of you have looked at that issue either, if that came up.
We have not, but I think it's very good comments.
You characterized our agenda very well.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, we have several public comment cards, so if you could free up the table.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for the opportunity.
You bet.
Thank you.
So 1 minute each on these. Start with Rosie Caddo, Andre Freeman, Clifton Allen, and John Howland. Let's go from left to right here. Sir, go ahead.
Oh, okay. My name is Andre Fryman. Thank you for the time. I just want to talk about motorcycle parking in Los Angeles. It's a violation if I park between vehicles. It should actually not be. It should be relaxed enforcement for that, just like San Francisco. I mean, it would encourage more people to ride. And you know, if I'm getting to work early and then I have to look for a spot, and my motorcycle is taking up an entire parking spot, it seems ridiculous because no one else can park there. Also, I didn't hear the panel talk about Project 20 in San Francisco. So living up there and parking was quite easy, but if you're a low-income person in Los Angeles and you get hit with a number of fines, you're pretty much sunk. Like you use your entire salary to pay off a $365 set of tickets. So in San Francisco, they have Project 20, which is a low income, which allows people to pay off their tickets by volunteering. It's an option for us. So.
Thank you for that suggestion. Yes, sir.
My name is Clifton Allen. I rent the first floor of the building at 2690 North Beechwood Drive, which is in the Beechwood Village. First, I'd just simply like to support the comments of Susan Polifornio, I think, who were made earlier, and draw your attention to a letter that's been submitted by the owner of our building, Pamela Meyer, on behalf of all tenants within the building. There are 2 floors and about 6,000 square feet of commercial space. It's 5 sentences. I'll read it. I'm writing to urge you reform the parking permit system to allow businesses and their employees to buy permits and PPDs in mixed-use areas such as the Beechwood Village. Modern urban planning calls for the integration of commercial and residential areas. This cannot be achieved in Los Angeles without reforming the current PPD system. The Hollywoodland residential commercial mix has provided a unique quality of life to the residents of Beechwood Canyon since the 1920s and can serve as a role model for other such pockets within Los Angeles. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
My name is Rosie Cotto. Again, I'm a board member of the West Los Angeles Sawtell Neighborhood Council, but I'm here as a constituent and homeowner of Council District 11. This report by this working group, it's not about turnover, it's all about revenue and favoring developers and businesses. My district, in Parking District 49, we have submitted petitions, but they're being delayed needlessly. The problem has been, the businesses and their customers are repeatedly disrespecting the history of the area, Sawtell, Japantown, and the families who live there, and nonprofits that do not pay property taxes and have their own parking lots and have members who do not reside in the area. We have 2 other churches in this area that arrange congregation parking on their own, and those examples need to be followed. Properties are being vandalized, and a resident's life was threatened by Sawtell business employees. The situation continues to escalate and is untenable.
Thank you. Mr. Howland.
Good afternoon. John Howland with the Central City Association. First off, thank you very much for treating these and this issue and this group with the respect that you have. It's nice to see. Would just like to follow up on the freight parking policy and say thank you for asking for these reports and ask that if it comes back, we'd like to see the additional recommendation followed up on, which is CD14, working with LADOT to create a downtown LA freight parking policy. Simply put, downtown, a lot of these buildings are really old, were never built with loading docks, and various companies get a lot of tickets, and there's a solution where they can still pay their fair share and can find a way around it. Thank you.
Thank you. Next 4 speakers are Lyndon Killam, Louis Chavez, Leslie D. Beers, and Stephen Vincent. Sir.
Okay. I'll tell you about my most recent experience. I got
your name, sir?
Lyndon Killam. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Got a ticket with no fine on it for a commercial vehicle, residential zone. Looked online. It said the amount owed on this ticket is $0.00. Okay. So a few months later, my workplace got late notices. I was delinquent, tried to challenge the ticket, couldn't challenge it. I was on a KCET segment with Mr. Beaver about that ticket. Went to court. He remanded the case to the parking bureau. Went to the hearing, and they said, for this type of ticket, we don't put the amount online because it's a variable ticket amount. And she told me a year and a half later I won in court, and they need to post the amounts online.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Luis Chavez, and I'm here as a citizen. I live on Sunset and Highland. I actually agree and I support all of the points that they made in the thing, except for the one issue when it comes to issuing or granting permits to employees, because I'm a resident there, and being in an intersection that is really busy as a resident, I do not want that because we're already limited on that number of passes, so I disagree with that. We should not be issuing permits to employees. Also, another issue that I have with the Department of Transportation is that whenever we contest a ticket, we are required to prepay the amount. So I feel that if we're going to do that, then it's only fair that if we have a hearing and the violation is dismissed, the citizen is also awarded the amount that he prepaid times 2, because that's exactly what happens when we don't pay in advance.
Thank you.
Hi there, my name is Leslie Beers, and I Ubered myself here to this meeting. I live in Sherman Oaks. I'm a Sherman Oaksian. I have a ticket I'm mailing out today for $73, so I was getting my hair done. And, the foils in your hair, you have to go, I don't know. I just didn't do it and got a $73 ticket I'm paying today. So this idea really would be helpful for me. I think that we have to really embrace mom and pop businesses because big conglomerates are gobbling up other people and becoming bigger and bigger, so we have to embrace mom and pops. Also, I have to say that the crosswalks, any crosswalk that's a crosswalk, should have some reflecting lights always flashing when pedestrians need to cross the street so they don't get killed. It's something that's really important. You want to have the businesses have customers. If we get tickets, it puts a negative spin on the whole thing. So I would appreciate it if you would take heed to this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Stephen Vincent, and I wanted to thank you all very, very much for taking this up today and giving us such consideration. There was one item that we were not able to get into deeply, and that's the matter of adjudication. And it is a huge issue on the minds of your constituents, I guarantee you that. On our website, people post stories about their experience parking in LA, and very frequently the complaints are revolving around the adjudication process, which people have reported is unwieldy. People feel as though they get the runaround, and that the intent of the system is essentially to exhaust them so that they capitulate and just pay up. Okay? Well, guess what? I bought a used car from someone. They lied to me, and there were 5 tickets on the car. They didn't send in the notice of liability, and so the car got towed. And I got put through that exact same process, and I came to the exact same conclusion. The system is arbitrary, unjust, and it needs to be addressed. So I want to encourage you to make that an important point.
Final 3 speakers are Susan, I'm going to butcher the last name, from the Mayor's Working Group.
Thank you. I had an opportunity
Oh, great.
to speak, and Jay knows how to narrow down what I wanted to say better.
Thank you very much. How do you pronounce your last name?
Polifronio.
Okay. Stephen Potts and Daryl Chan. Go ahead.
Okay, my name is Stephen Potts. I live in Studio City. When I was a young lad learning civics in the city of Los Angeles many years ago, I was taught that in the eyes of the law, if I ever accused of anything, I would be considered innocent before proven guilty in a court of law. Now, that may be true, but it's not true for parking enforcement. We are considered guilty before innocent, and not before a judge or magistrate, but before a council, a city board, review board that has a financial incentive to see the outcome of these cases. And if not that, they make the process so cumbersome that most people give up. My case in point, I parked in what I thought was a legal spot here in the city of Los Angeles. Turns out that it was a red zone, but I didn't catch that due to the poor paint and the poor lighting. I challenged the citation. I was told that it was upheld, that it was issued properly. I challenged it further by taking pictures and seeing an administrative review person, which dismissed the case. However, from the time of the citation to the time it was actually dismissed, 8 months. 8 months.
Thank you. And that is something this committee is going to be taking up. Yes, sir. Our final speaker.
Hi, my name is Daryl Chan. I need to do a quick disclaimer. I was a brief employee at Xerox with their parking citation. I was also involved with Los Angeles Parking Reform Working Group, and I'm a recent graduate of UCLA. I'm here with none of those 3, but just myself. I have a quick suggestion for improving parking reform here in Los Angeles. I think parking enforcement has very few metrics of success, and 2 of them are the money raised and how many citations issued. And I would like to add a few more metrics of success to those that are being tracked right now. Is either mileage or number of spaces checked. Right now, I think traffic officers are pressured into meeting a quota or some sort of goal for the entire department. And I think tracking just parking citations is a poor goal. And if the goal is to reduce the number of citations, we need to give them another metric of success.
Thank you very much. Anything else, colleague? All right, so without objection, then, we will approve the recommendations.
We'll continue the item and
Continue the
then
item,
report back.
Approve the recommendations, which create several different council files, so we can have an in-depth discussion on each item. That brings us to our final item, item number 7.
Item number 7 is an adopted budget recommendation relative to instructing DOT to report in regard to a 5-year expenditure plan for the Special Parking Revenue Fund.
Item number 7 here, when Mr. Parks was on council and chair of Budget and Finance, he had set us up on a process of having a 5-year plan for our Special Parking Revenue Fund so that it would help us prevent our Special Parking Revenue Fund from being rated during the annual budget process every year. Yes, I'm looking at you, Mr. Hirano. It was designed to help us ensure maintenance and operation of our parking assets and make sure those got budgeted first before the money got swept. Over the last several years, that plan has been abandoned, and it's time that we start bringing back some rigor to this process. And so what this item does is recommend that staff draft an update to the 5-year plan for the regular operation and maintenance and needs of our on- and off-street parking assets, specifically including an update on the 5-year plan to include budgetary needs to accelerate and expand Express Park, to have a proportionate budgeted share for needs of Code the Curb, and to initiate a pilot to return a portion of local revenues from meters for investment in local streetscape improvements. Anyone from the department have anything they want to add, or any of my colleagues have any questions? Okay, so without objection, that'll be the direction. And
yes, René Saglas, Department of Transportation. We will be using this year as another startup year. We submitted our last annual update for the 5-year plan in 2012. So we will be working with the CAO and our budget and admin group to include the plan as part of the Schedule 11.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chair, are we holding this in committee pending the report back?
No.
Or setting it forward?
Yes. Okay. That concludes this meeting. We are adjourned, and Mr. Jose Huizar and I need to rush to another committee meeting.